Everyone loves a fantastic or near perfect game. This is especially true with RPGs since they are such heavy time and focus investments. These games can have some minor flaws or aspects that aren't quite universally agreed upon, but they shine with a certain brilliance, overshadowing all the nitpicks. What I'm getting at is that it's easy to love a good RPG. It's less common for someone to be enamored with the strange ones, the off-kilter, awkward titles. To see the beauty and ingenuity that lies under the surface or what could have been. But that's fair. It's a little weird to do this. For the most part, people tend to be fickle and choosy with their RPGs. To be honest, there isn't anything wrong with that. People are free to like what they like, choose what they choose, play what they want, and pass on the rest. Gamers have such strong feelings about what they play and what they pursue. This especially makes sense with role-playing games. The whole genre, while more easily recognized and accessible today than ever, is still a niche territory that has many different little subgenres and trends nestled within it. People tend to find a vein of RPG gold that they like and get attached to. I personally like turn-based JRPGs or action RPGs light on the stats. One of my best friends, however, loves real-time gameplay and heavy customization. The RPG genre surely is something for everyone, but if you think about it, aren't these little trends and taste not so great? In my opinion, I think people often miss out on things when they find or get stuck in go-to patterns of likes and expectations. It's good to have standards and all, but you miss on so much by staying safe, not tossing it all to the wind and exploring the gaming landscape around you. There are so many games out there that just fall into odd cracks or have quirks that just stop them from reaching that trustworthy score on EGM or IGN. Games that aren't perfect technically, sometimes by a long shot, but still have much to offer in terms of entertainment or enjoyment. The land of RPGs is a perfect place to do this exploring. Like I said, there are lots of different areas to explore by nature, and RPGs tend to require strong investment and attention to detail. By giving a Wonky RPG the standard treatment, you get to dig deep and explore a title. You get to find all the diamonds in the rough, sometimes deep in the rough, or fall in love with a quirk that allows you to overlook rougher things like clunky mechanics. I love games like this. Wonky games make up a noticeable selection of games that receive my unwavering affection. They stick with me, and I like looking for new ways to talk about a game that may be spat upon in the past or was never really talked about at all. Wonky RPGs have led me to some great discussions at conventions and given me interesting things to say to interesting people online. With a close look, these games can be fantastic experiences if you give them a proper go and the right attention. Everyone should step outside the box you built yourself in. I'm going to try and explain why you should try RPGs that are a little wonky. There are a lot of components that can be played with to spice up an RPG, to keep a seasoned player on their toes. Graphics and style, gameplay and mechanics, or the world and the characters. They are all toys that developers use to tweak and manipulate players. A game like Cosmic Fantasy II falls into this space. The combat and overall game mechanics for Cosmic Fantasy II, released in 1992 for the TurboGrafx CD system, are kind of bland. Monsters are varied, but the battle screen art is static. Commands are competent, and fights are more or less fair, but nothing new, and the encounter rate is a little erratic. Besides all this, however, the game has a lot of going for it. On the narrative and aesthetic side, the characters all have something interesting to say. The story as a whole is a fun fantasy sci-fi romp, but it really knows when to throw an emotional punch and switch directions. Cosmic Fantasy II also has some great sprite-based cutscenes carrying it in key moments. The art is colorful and expressive, and this is largely the draw back in the day. The translation is good, too. Voice acting,
the elixir of life. Her awesome power of immortality flows through my body.
It takes plenty of liberties, but the translation feels right. A good example of localization over translation, courtesy of the late, great working designs. All of this is very uncommon for an RPG made by such a small company in the 90s. Still, I often found myself driving right back into the fray of awkward and difficult gameplay mentioned before, without a second thought, because the game had pulled me in. Mother 1 follows this trend nicely as well. The modern setting, stylish, well-crafted story, even the enemies and some items make the game stand out. Nevertheless, it doesn't have anywhere near the following that its sequel, Earthbound, does. That's because the combat is old-fashioned and cumbersome. The difficulty and item management are off-balanced, and the encounter rate, well, let's just call it clingy. You will not be speeding through this game. Even though all this is true, however, I really totally love this game. For me, the strong points are so unique, I kept coming back because my curiosity compelled me. The game became a personal challenge, a personal quest to finish. Actually, many patches and fan-translated versions of the game, including the superior Mother 1+2 GBA port, which has a much better translation and buttered-up setup, have an easy ring item that modifies EXP and money to make the game flow much better. It's worth trying if you want to play the game and make it more palatable. Anyway, as I kept going through every frustrating step, I found more fulfillment in the narrative and glue that held it all together. It's easy to brush aside Mother 1 as Earthbound's rougher, stiffer older brother. Many do, but it's even more that meets the eye. Mother, Earthbound 0, Earthbound Beginnings, whatever you want to call it, feels like an Earthbound game in the most valuable ways. It deserves to be played and enjoyed, warts and all. Some games are wonky because they play it too safe. They blend with the gaming backdrop of the day, and sometimes there isn't much when you peel back the surface layer. However, I've noticed that with the right twists and little details here and there, a game that could have been boring to the point of forgettability, we moved up a notch into the enjoyable but flawed zone. Evolution, the world of the sacred device for the Dreamcast, and its sequel, Evolution 2, Far Off Promise, fit well within this category. It's a pretty standard dungeon crawling affair, but it's saved with a battle system that has a slight strategic twist to it, with party placement and charming, well-animated characters. Also, the lack of random encounters allow for a more fluid exploration of said dungeons. Like in Earthbound, you can surprise enemies, get ambushed, or just have at it. To be honest, these tweaks stand out, and characteristics aren't too original, but it all works well that way. It's just enough to make the dungeon crawling interesting and the other elements fun, although not too complicated. The game is simple. The design very much works with this. Sometimes, though, a straightforward, light game is refreshing, and I think that is the case here. When I first started thinking of games that fit my wonky games outline, Persona 1, or Revelations Persona, as it was first known as in America, came to mind pretty quickly. These days, the Persona series is up there with the greats of RPGs, and some might consider putting a key entry on a flawed games list sacrilegious. But yeah, it fits. Persona 1, the PS1 version especially, has a lot of elements that conflict on a quality functionality standpoint. Some things are aesthetically done well, like character designs and music, but other things like maps and menus that age as well as cheese left in the sun. It may be fair to say the difficulty is a little unbalanced as well, but being the game that spun off from the notoriously difficult Shin Megami Tensei series, it might just be where things were at that point in its evolution. But all that aside, the game has a lot going on. The demon mechanics, moon cycles, and other mechanics are inspired by other Shin Megami Tensei games. Persona molds these concepts into its own thing. Persona 1 is a great example of a wonky game that I would mainly play to put recent entries into a clear, well-rounded perspective. At least with the PS1 release. The PSP re-release has a much welcomed quality of life adjustments, and the translation is much, much better. But the game still isn't a favorite of mine, and that's okay though, everyone's different. If you want to get a better sense of the history and development of the series, it's good to look at the beginning sometimes, even if your perspective differs and it may be a little bit wonky. Can sometimes carry a wonky RPG along, despite mediocre or frustrating elements that go with it. Okage Shadow King is a prime example of this. To be honest, I haven't beaten it yet. I just picked it up after it popped up on PSN for PS4. But I'm impressed despite its flaws. Okage is a visual wonderland. The designs are so unique, They really stand out for a game that first came out so early in the PS2 lifespan, a time when most developers were attempting softer looks with more realism. Because of this, you can see all the imagination that was put into this game bursting at the seams. It's fun to keep going just to see what you'll find next. But alas, like all Wonky games mentioned, there are some pits and valleys to cross along the way. Unfortunately, the part of Okage that was given the least amount of polish was the dungeons. Their layouts aren't too interesting, and the visuals become kind of bland and aren't much to look at. It's a shame considering how integral they are to the plot and part of the games. Okage does that thing that some old RPGs do, where you can't really target specific enemies, and that's strange. All you can do is select enemy groups. For example, you can only select one of the Tim Burton pumpkins in front of you, or one of the 2 anime scarecrows. To top it off, the menu system is just a little bit odd. Not cumbersome, but just different. For someone who hasn't played RPGs as old as that time to current day, these quirks aren't an issue to me. They simply just are quirks. But for someone who started their RPG career later in the lifespan of the PS2 line, like my friend who's playing the game for the first time right now as well, it can be more of a hurdle than a fun experience. In the end, sometimes these wonky elements vary person to person, and that's important to keep in mind when you give something a try or recommend a game to a friend. I thought the technical and mechanical struggles that Persona 1 gave me wouldn't be too bothersome for a friend, but it wore them down. Likewise, I kept telling my friend to try Mother 1, and she adores it. But she just couldn't get over the wonky elements that came with the other games recommended. She just didn't have the proper experience, something we both found while I was preparing this article. I really don't regret my time with any of the wonky games in my collection, or ones I've explored here. Even if I end up shelving a game because of disinterest, frustration, or anything else, everyone seems to have gotten something out of this experience. A broadened perspective, a new appreciation for gaming history, or even new trends that they discover they liked and look forward to in the future. This is why I like wonky RPGs. Next time you're in the market for a new game to play, widen your scope. Go crazy. Ignore the critics and play a wonky game to explore. Just learn and enjoy.